All right, welcome everybody to our fifth and final session in the S Word. Let's talk about suicide series session. The session is being recorded and will be posted at a later date on the Health Department YouTube, which can be searched at TCHDWI. I am Melissa Moore. I'm the Public Health Coordinator with the Taylor County Health Department. Just a couple quick notes before we get into our presentation today. I want to give a huge thank you to NTC's Workforce Training and Professional Development. Yes, fifth time today, finally got it right. Got the words in the right order. This is a mini celebration for me. I want to recognize them here, not only in the Medford campus, but also we are live streaming to our 5 other NTC campuses around the region. Welcome everybody that's joining us online and everybody that is joining us after the fact by viewing this recording on our YouTube channel. We really appreciate you being here. This would not be possible without funding through the Advancing a Healthier Wisconsin Endowment, which is our funding partner for this event. I'm going to show a quick video on behalf of them.
Hello, my name is Iguchi Madokwe. I am the director of the Advancing a Healthier.
Just kidding.
And I'm honored to join you this.
I have to make sure that I did not make it so you can hear it, because I had to restart the share. Oh, I did. Sorry, everybody. Resuming. I thought I forgot to put the share on, so we'll go ahead and get restarted on that video.
Hello, my name is Iguchi Madokwe. I am the deputy director of the Advancing a Healthier Wisconsin Endowment, and I'm honored to join you at this important learning event focused on building capacity to prevent suicide in Wisconsin communities. The Advancing a Healthier Wisconsin Endowment, or AHW, is Wisconsin's largest health improvement philanthropy and the only health philanthropy in the nation stewarding public funds from within a private medical school, that school being the Medical College of Wisconsin. AHW was established by MCW as the result of a generous financial gift made by the Blue Cross and Blue Shield United of Wisconsin to the people of Wisconsin, giving AHW the extraordinary responsibility to steward this financial gift on behalf of Wisconsin residents. We do that by investing in promising biomedical research, supporting community health initiatives, and building the health workforce needed by Wisconsin. Since 2004, AHW has invested in $337 million in 600 projects. The Learning and Event Support Grant we provided to the Taylor County Health Department for this event is just one of many funding opportunities AHW offers to community-based health organizations and other nonprofits, as well as MCW researchers to propel promising work and ideas aimed at improving health and advancing health equity in Wisconsin. I invite you to visit ahwendowment.org to learn more about opportunities to collaborate on our shared vision of a healthier Wisconsin. Thank you and enjoy this day of learning and networking. I have no doubt you will receive both information and inspiration that will benefit the important work you all do.
For those of you, if you were having struggles hearing it, I did put the link in there for our resource drive. All of our handouts from our presenters, as well as our handouts from other additional resources, and a summary of today's sessions, as well as our presenter information and bios is all available in that resource drive. So you can actually view that video in its entirety if you're unable to hear it now. This link is what was just dropped into the chat. For those of you that are viewing this on our YouTube channel, it is in the comments below, so you'll be able to access these resources there. So for our final session today, we are going to be looking at our agricultural and farming communities and the risk of suicide that is in that population. It's my pleasure to welcome Darla all the way from Montana to be here with us today. Woo! So I'm going to stop share and we'll have to make Darla a co-host, which I think you should be able to share yours up. Darla.
Hi, thank you so much, Melissa. I'm getting the message that I can't share my screen.
Oh, my bad. That's 100% on me. You may now share your screen.
Okay, great. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm so excited and I'm just so thankful to be able to be a part of your day. Thank you for allowing me to have this time with you. So I will just go ahead and just jump in with the presentation, and there's some unique, I think, connections to that area, which I'll share with you in just a moment. I used to believe that suicide was this terrible, awful, tragic event, and that it happened to other families. That all changed for me on September 30th, 2016. So I'm coming up on the 7-year mark. My dad was Dick Tyler, and he was an 82-year-old wheat farmer from Big Sandy, Montana. My brother and I grew up in the farmhouse that my dad was born in. My dad was born on the farm, and he died on the farm in his own hands. A few days after his death, I was talking with one of his friends, and his friend said, you know, when your dad was in town walking down the street and he saw you, he would stop and he would ask in earnest how you were doing. And he wasn't doing it to be nosy or gossipy. He just really cared about how you and your family were doing. And that was just one of the most beautiful things anyone has ever said to me about my dad. And that was true. I mean, my dad saw you, just be prepared. You're going to spend a few minutes chatting, even if you got a lot of things to do. He just wanted to check in with you. And that phrase, ask in earnest, just really has stuck with me. And so that is the message that I want to share with you today. So what we're going to cover in our time together is, you know, what do we know about farming and suicide? And I learned so much about it after my dad's death, and I wish I had known more before. Maybe that would have made a difference. Let's talk about some risk factors that put farmers and ranchers at a higher risk than other occupations. And when I say farmers, I'll just try to condense it and say farmers most of the time. That certainly is not meant to exclude ranchers, but it's just a little bit easier to say that word. Let's explore those harmful suicide myths that are out there and that allow suicide to continue. And then the good news is that there's action steps that we can take every day on the farm to help save lives. And then we'll have time for question and answer afterwards. So here, I was just so thrilled when Melissa first reached out to me because there's a personal connection. My mom was born and raised on a dairy farm right outside of Abbotsford. And so the picture that you are seeing was my grandma and grandpa's dairy farm. Unfortunately, it no longer exists. From what I remember, my mom said it was just about a mile outside of Abbotsford. So if you're from the Abbotsford area, and if you remember or know anyone from the Luth family, I would love to chat with you offline. I don't have a whole lot of memories from there because we were only back there a few times, and I was about 12 the last time that we went back there. But for those of you who are in the agricultural industry, dairy farmers, you have my respect. I couldn't imagine having to be there morning and night to milk those cows because they wait for no one, and they run your clock. You don't run their clock. That's a hard life, and you have my utmost respect. So thank you for what you do. So even though I'm not a dairy farmer, this is my personal passion that I want to hopefully convert into more of a full-time passion at some point in the future. But I still have one foot, if you will, in the farming community. I go back now each summer and help my brother with harvest. So the picture on the left can illustrate, you know, a day that everything goes well and you're just kind of like nailing it. That one, my brother said, well, when the bins start to get full, come get me and we'll move the auger to the next bin. And I snapped that picture and I scrambled up the steps of the combine and showed it to my brother. And he said, yep, that bin is full. We don't need to try to put any more in that. So that was a couple of years ago. And then the picture on the right is from this summer when I was just not getting along with the auger so well that day. So even though I don't farm full time, I feel like I can advocate for my people. My brother is continuing on at the family farm today. So what do we know about suicide and farming? In 2016, the CDC released a report that showed farmers, and in this report include farmers, ranchers, fishermen, and forestry, that had the highest rates of suicide per occupation. In 2018, they said, oh, wait, we did some data flaws. We need to retract that study. So they reworked the data. And after reworking it, they were still finding that if farmers, ranchers, and ag managers were in their own category, they would have ranked #1 in 2012 and 2015. So no matter how you slice the data, farming still has one of the highest rates of suicide per occupation. We know that rural suicide rates are 1.5 to 2 times that of urban rates. And data showed that nationwide from 1999 to 2019, there's a 34% increase in suicides, but rural suicides went up 48% between 2000 and 2018. And the most recent data that we have shows that from 2021 to 2022, nationally, there's a 3% increase. So we are all on this call, we are all working hard, we're doing fantastic life-saving work, and there's just more work to be done yet. With the farming and ranching, we know that age matters. In the past 15 years, 45% of farmers' suicides were in people aged 65 and older. Yet that group is only 1/3 of the farm and ranch population. So our older farmers are disproportionately recognized or reflected in that data. And then also on the flip side, we see some troubling trends with younger farmers. And what we do know is that younger farmers who die by suicide were more likely to have relationship problems, and older farmers were more likely to have physical health problems. Wasn't it worse in the 1980s farm crisis? Some of us might have been farming during that time, or we were growing up during that time. During that time, farmer suicide was getting a lot of attention in the media. Well, wasn't it things worse back then? Actually, today's rate for farmer suicide is 50% higher than it was back in the 1980s. And tragically, every 10 hours in Wisconsin, you lose a person to suicide. And every 11 minutes in the United States, we lose someone to suicide. So we lose about 130 people every day to this tragedy. Not only is this an issue for America's farmers, but we also see it worldwide. In Australia, the suicide rate is double in the rural areas compared to urban areas. The United Kingdom has farming has one of the highest rates of suicide per occupation. In France, the dairy farmer suicide rate is 50% higher than the national average. And India has literally had thousands of farmers die over the past years. And we know that one suicide impacts nearly 150 people, and it's not unreasonable to think it impacts even more people in rural communities because of that ripple effect. Because you're tight-knit, everyone knows everyone in a community, a smaller community, and it can just have a wider, devastating impact. And let's take action now so that we can save lives. So I won't read you this whole slide. This is a quote from Mike Rosemont, who is just a wonderful, wonderful human being. And he is so unique in that he is a psychologist and he is a farmer in Iowa. So many of you may have heard of him. He has dedicated his professional life to addressing behavioral health in the farm population. I will read the bolded text. It reads, "The agrarian imperative," which is his theory, instills farmers to work incredibly hard, to tolerate unusual pain and adversity, to trust their own judgment, and to take uncommon risks. And so if you are a farmer, or if you're farming as your family, if you work with people who are farmers, you can think of lots of people who you can check the box that they meet all this criteria. Unfortunately, what works well to help you be a good farmer can work against you when it comes to mental health and recognizing that you need help, and also asking for help and accepting help. So this agrarian imperative essentially says there is an incredible pressure to maintain and pass on that family farm to the next generation. And also, it also shares the philosophy or helps us realize that a farmer's identity is strongly tied to that farm. And if that identity, if that connection to that farm is threatened or if it's disrupted, it can create major trauma for that person. I can honestly say that's probably, looking back, what happened with my dad. My dad had some serious health challenges. My dad was so proud of the fact that he was a part of Harvest from age 11 up until the age of 81. I mean, think about it, like 70 years of being a part of something, and he loved it. Because of his health issues, he was not able to participate in Harvest that last summer. And we all knew that it was hard on him, but we were chalking it up to, well, Dad has been through a lot. He's going to get through this and can continue on. And that wasn't the case. And looking back now, I could probably just hear my dad saying to himself, well, I can't farm anymore, so what the hell good am I? So let's take a look at those risk factors. The first one is a work-life balance, or for many of you, probably an imbalance. If we think about time at work and time away from work, for farmers, there is no psychological or any kind of physical separation. If I have a bad day at work, I can go home, I can walk my dog, I can listen to some music on the way home, I can go for a run or maybe watch some TV. You know, there's lots of things that I can do to help me with that bad day, but I physically leave my workplace. Farmers and ranchers, you can't do that. So that psychological and physical break is not possible for you. Another risk factor is economics. Some data from 2019 shows that farm debt at $416 billion is at an all-time high. More than half of all farmers have lost money every year since 2013 and lost over $1,600 more in that past year. So it's just more and more challenging economically to be on the plus side of economics. The language and the culture of farming. So when I was in high school, my dad and my brother were out harvesting one morning and they were cutting barley. And my mom and I were in the house, and it was maybe a little bit too damp or a little bit maybe too early in the morning to be out there cutting, but my dad was out there. And so the combine was sitting still and he was augering off into the truck. And so it wasn't augering off well. So my dad got up in the combine tank and was kicking the barley around and trying to get it to go out the auger a little bit easier. And he momentarily got his foot caught in the auger and he was able to jerk it back out, crawled up into the tank, or crawled up out of the tank, got back into the cab, slammed the combine into gear and took off. And later on, he shared with us that he said, yeah, the pain was so bad for a while. I was gripping onto the steering wheel really tight because I thought I was going to pass out. At that time, my dad wore cowboy boots, and he said he looked down one time and he just saw blood coming out of his boots. So he just looked up and he kept going. He didn't want to look down again. So he tolerated that for a while, but then he got to a point where he just couldn't do that anymore. So he shut down. My brother and my dad came into the house where my mom and I were, and my dad said to my mom, I'm hurting and I'm hurt. I need help. I mean, of course, right? You have this cut up foot inside your cowboy boot. There's blood coming out of it. You're in terrible pain. It's logical. It's normal. It's necessary. It's rational that you say, I'm hurt. I need help. Fast forward 35 years later, when my dad was having his identity threatened so bad and he couldn't be out there farming and he was probably questioning his value, he didn't have that language in him. And it's not easy for men. And the culture of farming doesn't make it easy to say, I'm hurting psychologically, I'm hurting mentally, I'm hurting spiritually, I need help. But luckily, all of us are here today and we're working to change that. Exposure to pesticides, pharmaceuticals, and grain dust can be a risk factor. There's a link between depression and exposure to pesticides. Prolonged exposure to grain dust can lead to fatigue, insomnia, sleep disorders. There's been some studies out there that show prolonged exposure to grain dust can increase inflammation in the body. And elevated inflammation markers have been seen with depression, anxiety, and bipolar disorder. A risk factor can be a lack of or a reluctance to seek mental health services. There's just not that many mental health professionals in rural America and rural Wisconsin. Alcohol use as a coping strategy. From the data I've seen and from what I've heard, Wisconsin can be a pretty hard drinking state. Much like Montana, data from Montana shows that alcohol in the blood at the time of death in Montana is double that of the national average. My apologies, I don't have Wisconsin specific data, but I could imagine it would be pretty similar to that. Access to lethal means. There's lots of ways to hurt yourself lethally on the farm. Firearms, poisons, machinery, suffocation. We have no shortage of having access to those means. A lack of vitamin D in the blood worldwide. We see that low levels of vitamin D in the blood, when we see that, we can see increases in depression. Both Montana and Wisconsin are in the Northern Hemisphere, so we know we're entering that dark time of the year, right? So that can place us more at risk. It's estimated that up to 90% of people who die from suicide have an undiagnosed and untreated mental health condition at the time of death, depression being the number one of those. And we're going to continue to talk about depression throughout this. Anxiety and stress regarding climate change. So climate change can be, a big topic in agriculture. A study done by Montana State University, study of 125 Montana farmers found that 70% agree that climate change is having an impact on their business, and nearly 3/4 of them are experiencing moderate to high levels of anxiety when thinking about climate change. So what that study essentially said is, hey, regardless of where you land on climate change, whether you think it is a thing or causes of it, it's stressing you out. Social isolation is a risk factor when you have fewer people to connect with. We are social creatures. That can place us more at risk. And by nature, farmers and ranchers do a lot of work, long days by themselves or with very few people around them. And stigma, the belief, that culture that we can go to the dentist and we can talk about it. We can go to the doctor and we can talk about our sprained ankle. But it can be different if we want to talk about seeking out mental health services. But we're working together to change that. So that's why we're all here. So let's take a look at those harmful myths about suicide that allow it to continue. One is that most suicides happen without warning, whereas in fact, up to 80% of people do display warning signs, but we tragically miss them. Another myth is that people who die by suicide are selfish and take the easy way out. Whereas in reality, their sense of judgment, their sense of truth is distorted by this cloudy filter of pain. And they have impaired thinking and they just aren't able to make rational decisions at that moment. I used to believe this next one. I used to think, well, once someone is suicidal, they'll always be suicidal and there's nothing that we can do about it. And actually that's false. What we see is that they've done work with people who have survived their own attempts. And it's shown that up to 90% of people won't go on to make a second attempt, especially if they get connected to the help that they need, whether that's medical help or mental health or a combination of both. This is an especially important myth to talk about, especially with youth. The thought or the worry about talking about it causes it. So if I'm worried about someone, I really might want to say something to them, but I'm worried about if I say the word suicide, am I planting that idea in their head? And then if something does happen later on, then I gave them the idea. That is a myth that has never, ever, ever been shown to actually be true. The data does not support that myth. This is especially important with young people because one person might say, "This, you can't tell anybody," and no, we need to get other people involved. Actually, what can happen is if we ask someone, "I'm really worried about you. I care about you. Are you thinking about suicide?" That can open up such a door of relief because finally someone wants to hear us, someone wants to understand, someone sees that I'm in pain, and we are literally have the ability to throw someone a lifeline and save their life. And then I think, an especially important myth to challenge in the farming industry is strong people don't kill themselves. I think, probably my dad was the strongest person I ever knew. Not only, he was an average sized man, but what he withstood over the years, his mangled foot in the auger, multiple eye surgeries, bypass surgery, hip replacement surgery, the smashed fingers, the long days out in the field, and the psychological strength that you need to be a part of harvest for 71 years. There's some resilience and some strength with that. We have this harmful lens or this harmful myth, like suicide has something to do with being weak or not having a strong character, and that is not the case at all. So let's really challenge the notion or that harmful myth that strong people don't kill themselves. So now that we've talked about myths, let's talk about, hey, here's all the awesome, incredible things that we can do to help save lives. Huge is to learn the warning signs. And again, up to 80% will display warning signs that we tragically miss. Mike Roseman, I referred to him earlier, said that most agrarian people know how to work hard. No one has to teach us how to do that. We know what a good honest day's work looks like, right? But we know less about managing behavior in relationships. Is this not in agricultural curricula? So here's a learning opportunity for to help prevent more suicides. First one is, what kind of language are people using? We want to pay attention to 3 common themes. The number one of them being a burden. They worry about somehow, for some reason, that they're going to become a burden to those around them. And in terms of my dad's case, honestly, in the months leading up to his death, he was having such bad vision problems. He couldn't be out there for that last harvest. He talked to both my brother and I that he worried about going blind. We didn't pick up on it at the time. He was telling us he was worried about becoming a burden. There's a loss of hope. They may be saying things like, nothing works anymore. There's no use for me in trying. I might as well give up. So language, something to that effect. And they can't see a future for themselves. So if you were to ask someone, well, what do you think life is going to look like 6 months down the road? They wouldn't be able to give you an answer. We want to really pay attention to direct versus indirect language that a person is communicating, because again, up to 80% are giving us signs that we're tragically missing. So some direct words could be something like, well, I'm going to end it all. Or I'm going to kill myself. So those are very direct, right? Those would get our attention right away. Some indirect things that we want to pick up on that we might be tempted to kind of say, well, that's really strange that he said this, but we don't ask further on. Or we might think, well, he said this, but he must mean something else, and we don't ask. Some indirect things might be something like, don't be surprised if I die in a tractor rollover. Or if I die, you get my favorite Winchester shotgun. So talking about death, but not in a direct manner. We want to pay attention to a person's mood. Do they seem depressed? Not a lot of energy. Sleeping, if we know their sleep habits. So either they're sleeping all the time or they're not sleeping at all. Low energy, not themselves. Or kind of on the flip side, all of a sudden we see, we've been worried about them with their behavior and the mood and the words that they're saying. All of a sudden we see a sudden improvement. What might be happening there is that a person has been struggling with thoughts of suicide, and that sudden improvement is not happiness that we are seeing, but it's actually relief because they've made the decision that they are going to make an attempt. And the struggle, if you will, has just given them relief, and it's not happiness. And actions that we want to pay attention to, again, we talked about it. There's lots of ways to lethally hurt yourself on the farm, but are they acquiring more guns? Or are they stockpiling pills? Are they doing research about buying more guns, or actively, doing some research, trying to acquire additional means? Could be a sign. Oftentimes we've seen anger and expressing anger in kind of unusual ways. That's not really part of them. And withdrawal. So they're withdrawing from things that they used to really enjoy. Maybe no longer participating in bowling night or attending high school sporting events, or withdrawing from church activities, like things that they really used to like doing and you'd always see them there, and they've retracted and you don't see them. Okay. So again, action steps that we can take to save lives is, to ask in earnest. So I really encourage people to zoom out and take a look at that person from the 30,000-foot view. I think in my family's case, we were all so close to the situation that we knew that my dad was struggling, and we knew that he was having a hard time, but we didn't zoom out and really probably take that full picture. So please, when you can, zoom out and see everything that's going on in that person's life, and we might need to do some follow-up. We need to listen. I'm sorry, I'm going to go back 1 second. See from the 30,000-foot view. So what is that person doing? Are they avoiding the public events? Did they have a really flat affect? Again, retreating behaviors and isolation. When you see that person, what is their appearance like? Is there a decrease in their personal appearance, possibly hygiene? What does the farmstead look like? Are the fields nice and clean like they usually are, or are they not? What's the health and the condition of the animals? Oftentimes we can see deterioration in the farmstead and in the animal health if someone is really, really struggling. So then we want to listen a little bit differently. Again, those warning signs. What we do know is when people do share their intentions, they share them very specifically. It's not just, they won't say those warning signs just to random people. So if you do hear words like that, it is someone is making some intentional efforts to communicate some thoughts and potentially some planned actions to you. Listen to what isn't being said. Are they talking about not being able to sleep, or are they wanting to sleep all the time? That is huge. Or they might be talking about having this feeling like there's a lump in my throat, or I feel like I could cry all the time, but I can't cry. Things like that we really need to pay attention to. We have to be willing to ask the hard question. Michael Stanier, the author of Do More Great Work, has said this about men. He said, men carry the burden of being strong and never weak, and we all pay the price for it. So with that, we need to ask someone some really, really life-saving, important questions. And when we ask, hey, if I'm nervous and if I feel like my heart is in my throat and I'm sweaty, my palms are sweaty, and I'm kind of stammering around. That's okay. You can be nervous, you can feel afraid, you can feel a little unsure, but you need to ask the questions. So you have to be willing to be really strong and vulnerable, and strong and vulnerable are not opposites. I think they're the same. We have to be strong and ask that question because we're asking the other person to be strong and to be vulnerable and tell us if they're thinking about suicide. We have to be willing to be direct. We have to be willing to say that ugly, awful word. I wish suicide to me is a vulgar word. I wish it didn't have to come out of my mouth, but it does. We have to be willing to ask or say things like, I really care about you. I need you alive. Are you thinking about suicide? How you ask can make a difference. The worst thing that you can say about, if you're worried about someone, if they're thinking about suicide, the worst thing that you can say is nothing at all. Okay. So that being said, how you ask can make a difference. So if you are worried about me and you came to me and we were having a conversation and you said, Darla, I'm worried about you, but you're not thinking about suicide, are you? And with this kind of body language and saying it that way, that would tell me like, you really don't want to know. And oh gosh, it doesn't open up for a really open, honest conversation. So I would probably say like, no, everything's fine. Whereas if you came to me and said, Darla, I'm really worried about you. I'm concerned about you. Are you thinking of suicide? That allows this door to open, and it tells me that you want to hear what I'm thinking. You want to listen, and you're not judging me. But again, the worst thing that we can say is nothing at all. And if we start out asking the questions and we realize, oh, I'm saying it in a really bad way, that's okay, because we can literally say, oh, time out, time out, time out. Let me back up. That didn't come out right. Here's what I want to say to you. So even if you fumble when you first start out, that's okay. Just keep going. And then also we want to listen to plans and details. So if a person has, if they say, yeah, I am thinking about it, and we're talking with them, if we ask, have you thought about how you would do it? Where do you have access to the means? The more detailed the person's plan is, the more critical it is to get that person connected to help right away. Another life-saving strategy that we can do is restrict access to lethal means. We want to put time and distance between suicidal thoughts and actions. So they've done some work with people who have survived their own suicide attempt, and it was surprising to me to learn how fast things happen, okay? 75% of people who made an attempt did so within 1 hour of making the decision to take their own life. In my dad's case, that was true. My brother was out in the field. I'm almost 5 hours away from the farm, working my own life. My mom fixed my dad some lunch, and she needed to go to town to get him some eye drops because it was Friday and the pharmacy isn't open on the weekends. And so my mom said, do you want to come with me? And my dad said no. So my mom left the farm and went to town and got my dad his eye drops. And by the time that she was gone and came back was an hour. I'm here to say it happens very quickly. So in thinking about, firearms, which is a huge part or usually a large reason why, or access to lethal means, or the method used, I'm sorry. We see that in Wisconsin, nearly 1/2 of suicides involve a firearm. So please don't misunderstand me. It's not a conversation about gun control. It's about saving lives. So that conversation might sound something like, I'll say, Pete, Pete, you're my friend. I'm really worried about you. You're thinking about suicide. I need you to stay alive. How about I just hold on to your guns and your ammo, and when you get to feeling better, you can have them back. And what can happen oftentimes is that person just feels such a sense of relief because you're removing that easy access, right? So we can have that conversation with people and say, it's just temporarily, let me help you stay safe. Or if it's not guns, maybe it's, I hold on to your medication. And if you need it daily, hey, come over and get 1 day's dose every day, and I'll help you until you feel better, something like that. And share your concerns. This is too serious to take on by yourself. Get other trusted family, other friends involved. Let's keep that person safe. So other action steps we can do is call 988, the National Crisis and Suicide Prevention Hotline, 24/7, 365. And it's also, I never realized this about hotlines. I used to think it was only for the person themselves in crisis. But let's say if I'm really worried about a friend and I don't really know what to do, and I need some help, I don't know who to ask, call 988. And those trained people on that other end of that line can help you, give you good strategies, give you good ideas. Another scenario could be you're sitting there with your friend and you're talking, and yeah, you've had that conversation, you've asked them that question, they're thinking about suicide. You could say, hey, let's call the suicide prevention hotline. Let's put that person on the speakerphone and let's have a 3-way conversation and help you stay safe. It is awesome. I just learned some stats from Montana. 70% of calls to 988 in Montana are resolved in that call. So basically what that means is that person got the help that they needed by calling 988. It didn't have to go elevated up to that next step. So please utilize that resource. You can also use it as a text to 988. You can also chat online to 988lifeline.org. You can take that person, you can go to your local emergency room, help them connect and stay with that person that you care about. And if you ask that question and you stay with that person, you are doing suicide prevention. You are doing enough. You are being there with that person. So that is awesome life-saving work by asking a question and staying with that person and getting them connected to help. Some other things that you can do, like more on the community scale, is bring, if it's not happening already in your community, but I feel like it probably is, but if it's not, you can bring gatekeeper training to your community. One example is question, persuade, and refer. And you can think of QPR is like CPR for suicide. And sometimes people might be a little bit reluctant to do that because they might think, well, gosh, I wouldn't know what to say to a person in that situation. And I could never, kind of like be their counselor. We're not asking people to do that with QPR. Kind of like on the flip side, when we teach people CPR, we aren't asking that person to turn into an emergency room doctor, are we? We're just taking people, when a person is needing life-saving help, we're giving people CPR skills to be that bridge between that injured person and life-saving help. Same thing with QPR. No one says, I can't do CPR because I'm not a doctor. Let's not fall into the belief that, well, I can't do QPR because I wouldn't have what it takes to be a mental health professional, or I'm not a mental health professional. That's okay. You don't need to be. And we're not asking you to do that with QPR. So just like it's really normal to get trained in CPR, let's make it normal to get trained in QPR. You can access these trainings, bring them to communities. Your county health department, Melissa and her team are a great resource. County extension offices, who in your community can champion these efforts? Is it your local fire ambulance crew? Is it a church group? Is it a neighborhood group? Is it you who can bring this life-saving work to your community? Earlier in the presentation, I talked about Australia having a really high rate of suicide among their farmers too. Here's an example of more life-saving work that's grassroots level. What they're doing in Australia is that they take trained mental health professionals and go out to rural Australia. I've never been there, maybe some of you have, but rural is like 11 hours away. Like that's rural, right? And so they bring farmers together, and with the help of mental health professionals, they'll start out and they'll ask them, okay, what's stressing you out? And people will start to share, this is stressing me out, and that, and that. And what happens is very organic and very cool, because this person will say, this is stressing me out. And this other person will say, well, this stresses me out too. And here's what I did to help with that. And so there's a lot of learning, a lot of sharing, a lot of support. And that mental health professional just helps facilitate that. So that's the first night. And then the second night, they have the wives and the girlfriends come in with the men too. So then the wives and the girlfriends can share what's stressing them, and they can learn to how to help support the farmers as well. And what they find, and what I experienced too, is the more rural you go out, actually, the more people want to talk about mental health and suicide. I've been privileged and I've been humbled to hear stories of people who've survived their own attempts. People need to share their ongoing grief of losses, people they've lost to suicide. So the further rural out they go, the more that people really want to talk about mental health. So we have to continue to challenge that stigma that people don't want to talk about mental health, because they do. We just have to provide that safe, supportive environments to allow those conversations to happen. Okay, fingers crossed, Melissa, that this will work. It's a video. The first time I saw it, I cried my eyes out because it reminds me so much of my dad. Maybe it'll move you too. And we are working to get the end information updated. So just give me some grace in the last part of it.
Yeah. Hey, geez, how you doing? That's the day Jim saved my life. I tried ending it all once before. Hold on, fellas. Jim wasn't going to let it happen again.
Hi, Jim. Where's the skipper?
When I stopped showing up, Jim showed up at my door. He didn't let me brush him off. And he took me to the hospital in town to get me help.
Everyone has a role in preventing suicide. Know the warning signs and rock your role. If someone you know is in crisis or emotional distress, call the Idaho Suicide Prevention Hotline at 208-398-HELP.
I think it's just so incredible, right? I mean, what is Jim? Jim wasn't this superhero. He wasn't this trained mental health professional. He wasn't a psychiatrist. Jim was just being a friend. And Pete said, Jim didn't let me brush him off, and he took me to get help. And that's the life-saving work that we can do every day on the farm. Again, thanks for your grace on this last slide. The current one that I have does have my logo on it, but it does need to get updated to the 988. So a little bit of grant funding, we'll get that fixed. So again, other action steps that we can do. Everyone can help end that stigma. On the left is a current yard sign campaign that we have going on here in Yellowstone, in the Yellowstone Valley. We're doing it at a smaller scale this year from last year, but this one is targeting that farm and ranch population with those images, helping, again, challenge the notion that we're supposed to always figure it out on our own, and we can't ask the question. So even, putting yard signs out in your yard help elevate the conversations about mental health. Many of you are probably familiar with the Little Hearts Project out of, I'm going to say the town's name wrong, so I'll ask for a little grace, but I think it's Unalaska, Wisconsin, outside of La Crosse. Okay, thank you. Those hearts are out here in Montana, preventing suicide one heart at a time. And on the Facebook page, and the hearts are getting everywhere. And I think they might even be over in Europe, the last couple of posts I saw not long ago. So elevating the conversations about mental health. So a team approach, who else can we get on our team or on a person's team that we're worried about? And who are the people on the checklist? Friends and family, healthcare providers. There's some work to be done with healthcare providers. We know from the data that people who die by suicide often see their healthcare provider in the month or so prior to their suicide. So bringing awareness and education and training in that arena is important as well. Mental health providers, absolutely crucial. Also in a small town, in rural areas, clergy can be especially helpful. They will probably have more availability than mental health professionals. Something that I think is really impactful and very cool in my hometown newspaper is that our clergy will have an ad in the newspaper every week for 988. And for a while, they had their own names and phone numbers. And it said, call 24/7 if you need help. And what was really cool too is it didn't say things like, well, if you're Lutheran, call this number. And if you're Methodist, call this number. No. They don't care about what denomination you are or last time you were to church, or even if you go to church. They just want people to stay alive. So tap into that resource. Who are other supports? Is it a veterinarian, a banker, a pharmacist, the Wisconsin Wellness Hotline? And also, let's listen and learn from others. Let's challenge stigma and commonly held beliefs. One perfect example is on Spotify, the Cutting Fences has a podcast. The person you see is my best friend. He was raised on a dairy farm in Northern California and went on to have a 30-year career in the Air Force, retired as a Chief Master Sergeant. And now he spends time helping veterans transition back into the civilian world. And he talks at length about PTSD and moral injury. And one of the chapters in his book is titled "It's Okay to Cry on the Farm." And he tells a story of his experiences growing up on a dairy farm and what you're taught as a young boy if you're hurt, and how our typical response of how we handle those situations was not helpful for him later on, dealing with post-traumatic stress and moral injury and what he experienced while serving our country. Farmers take care of one another. Let's tap into who we are. Some quotes is it's in our nature to care. We are caretakers of the land, animals, and the community. If someone is experiencing a mental health condition, of course we should want to help, because that's in our nature. That's who we are. So if you think about someone, if we see someone that we know that has the broken arm, what do? We want to sign the cast. And what are we doing when we sign the cast? We are saying, hey, sorry this happened to you. Feel better soon. I care about you. Let's sign the cast for mental health. We kind of rush up to someone that we know if we see the cast on the broken arm, but do we always have that same response if we know of someone who's struggling with a mental health condition? Do we have more of a tendency to avoid that person and walk 2 blocks around them rather than have a conversation with them? So let's sign that cast for mental health. Another important thing that we can do is work towards balance on the farm. Why talk about these things that we're going to talk about right now is because I have a philosophy of let's meet people where they're at. Maybe it's a bridge too far for someone to get onto an iPad and talk with a stranger that they've never met, and you want me to talk about what's troubling me, what's stressing me, what's making me feel really, really stressed and down. That might be a bridge too far. So let's meet people where they're at. And so please don't misunderstand me. I'm not talking about, well, these are strategies that you can take if someone is in suicidal crisis. No, I'm swimming further upstream. And what are some things that we can do to improve mental health on a daily basis on the farm? And how can we impact mental health in positive ways? All these things that we're going to talk about help combat depression And going back to an earlier slide, up to 90% of people who die by suicide have an undiagnosed, untreated mental health condition, the number one being depression. Sleep. What are we doing to create a healthy sleep environment? We want, and it seems like it makes sense, but not always. We want to have a quiet room, unless we want to use like a noise canceling app on our phones where we fall asleep listening to raindrops or to a babbling brook or something of that nature. We sleep better in a quiet room. Also, we sleep better in a dark room. And this might seem like a no-brainer, but my husband and I used to go round and round and round because he always said, I need the TV on to fall asleep. And I would say, I need the TV off to fall asleep. So where's that middle ground if you have roommates or if your spouse has a different idea about that? We also sleep better in a room that's cool. And a room that has has some humidity to it. So if it's the dry time of the year, you can get a cheap little humidifier from CVS, Walgreens, Walmart. At least keep the air in your bedroom more humid and you'll sleep better. Limit stimulants such as caffeine, nicotine, especially later in the afternoon and into the evening to help promote sleep. And then also scent can help. Lavender has been shown to help promote more restful sleep. So you can sprinkle some or spritz some lavender essential oil on your sheets and on your pillowcases and see if that helps. Nutrition can impact our mental health. A body that is continually stressed is more prone to depression. If a body is dehydrated, it is stressed. And we need somewhere between 5 glasses of water a day up to about 11. And they've shown that a poor quality diet, so diets that were high in processed meat, sweets, fried food, refined cereals, high-fat dairy products, tended to have higher rates of depression versus people who had diets more like complex carbs, lean proteins, wide variety of fruits and vegetables, and then gut healthy probiotics like yogurt, pickled vegetables, that kind of thing. We're finding out more and more about gut health can actually impact our mental health. Exercise. Exercise is the best free antidepressant out there. It has been shown that it boosts endorphins anywhere from 2 to 4 hours after we exercise, sometimes even up to 24 hours later. And it increases the release of serotonin, and low serotonin levels have been linked with depression. And it makes us feel better. It helps us just relax and just promotes those healthy, happy brain chemicals. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be complicated. A good pair of walking shoes and comfortable clothes. And it's interesting. Mental health professionals that I have talked to always recommend exercise as part of that treatment plan for individuals that they're working with. Stress management. What's in your toolkit? How do you handle the stress for your daily life? For me, one big thing that helps me with my stress is exercise. But I don't want to have exercise as my sole tool in my toolkit, because if I'm out running and it's icy and I slip and I sprain my ankle, I can't exercise anymore. So then how am I going to manage my stress? What are some things work better for one person than another? Have lots of tools in your toolkit to help with that. And gratitude. There's a lot of interesting research coming out about gratitude and mental health. So gratitude is being thankful for the good things and the good people in our life. And then the follow-up is expressing that thankfulness. When we acknowledge the small positive things in our life, we rewire our brain to deal with the present with broader perspective and more awareness. So by reducing stress, gratitude decreases depression and anxiety. So some things that we can do to help boost our gratitude is a gratitude journal. It doesn't have to be a journal. It could be a slip of paper every day, 5 things I'm thankful for. It could be taking some time and expressing our appreciation for the people in our lives. Living in the moment. performing random acts of kindness, letting a person into the traffic lane, buying coffee for the person behind us, baking some cookies for a person who's under the weather, volunteering at an activity. The list goes on and on. You have your own ideas, but it's really interesting and it's really exciting, and that's stuff that we can do on the farm every day. So this is always the most the saddest slide for me to get through, because that's obviously a picture of my family. That's the last picture I have of my family intact. That was taken about a year before my dad died. I was up for the weekend. It was after harvest, and we went down to Loma, a town of maybe 200 people, and had supper. And it was such a nice summer evening. It was just too early to go home. We didn't want to just go home. So we said, let's drive on to Fort Benton. So there's a nice little walking bridge over the Missouri River there. And, it's just one of those really nice, easy, happy to be alive moments. And I'm so thankful I have that picture. And the last time I physically laid eyes on my dad was Memorial Day weekend, and Dad was Dad, and he was gone at the end of September. So I would just really encourage people, if you're concerned about someone, have those conversations, get some other people involved. Let's have those conversations and see if someone is needing some help. Some next steps. I currently have a social media campaign. I'll talk about my website in a minute, or my Facebook page in a minute, getting a lot of traction. Again, challenging those myths and those harmful stigmas that are out there about mental health and men and rural living. Our next step is to repeat those campaigns in print media, going to rural counties in Montana. So that's coming out in the next month that I'm excited for. We're also working on some workbooks and toolkits for people to have available to use every day on the farm to help protect mental health and elevate the conversations about mental health. I want to continue to bring life-saving strategies and actions to the farm and ranch community. Listen to farmers and help build what is most impactful and most effective for you. And bottom line is, I want to help others see that they are not alone and there is hope. Some resources I think are really helpful. I really like the Farm Bureau State of Mind website. Check that out if you haven't. I'm also a huge fan of Australia's efforts, so check out that Australian website too. And so I think, check those out when you have a chance. And so in wrapping up, I think the most simple, basic message I can say to you is ask in earnest and you may save a life. My website is askinearnest.org. You can reach out to me at askinearnest@hotmail.com. I'm not on Twitter, formerly known as Twitter. I'm not on there very much, but I do have a handle. I am on Facebook, Ask in Earnest Facebook, and I'm also on LinkedIn a little bit. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Darla. Round of applause, please. I did not see any questions come up in the chat, but this is where the opportunity where folks can unmute themselves and feel free to ask a question. I am trying to figure out why I cannot see the video panel. There we go. Does anybody have any questions online? I know we lost a few folks along the way here as we wind down. This session is recorded. It will be available online. Thank you again, Darla, for being a part of this event. We're very excited to have you here, and we hope to be able to bring you in person, in the flesh, so you can have a reunion with Central Wisconsin again. There are some materials. Thank you. There are some materials that UW Extension uses here locally for their ag outreach programs. We're going to see if we can find those electronically as well to put into the Google Drive. But anything else, for the good of the order today, I'm just gonna quick pop back up. All right. This, and just remind people that handouts will be online again, just so then people can kind of see that. All right, here we go. And then I see we've got anybody have question online? I see cameras on. I just want to make sure I respect the fact. Sean, did you have a question or a comment?
I was just gonna add that we utilize something called
You're a little bit quiet, Sean.
I'm sorry. We utilize something called Comet, and it's a really good training for rural community members to learn how to talk about tough things. And it's a pre-crisis training, so the idea is that you recognize when somebody's getting towards a crisis, and you can interact with just a simple conversation and turn them back towards a place of wellness. And that's
Sean,
actually offered online, like UW Extension and other places. It's a wonderful training.
Thanks so much, Sean. It's great that you mentioned that, because just today a colleague of mine reached out to me and said, "Hey, there's this training coming out. We should bring this into Montana." And I said, "Yes, we should." So we're on our way. I think we're a little bit behind you guys, but we'll do our best to catch up. Thank you for sharing.
As I say, Sean, if you want to put the name of that training into the chat, that would be great, and we'll be able to pull that out. Or you can always put my email in the chat. You can always email me information about it as well, because that Google Drive is meant to be something that we'll continue to update. Because I have not heard of that program, which is awesome. Whoop. All right, just a quick reminder, you mentioned QPR. Yes, Darla, we do have people trained here in Taylor County as well as in the counties surrounding us. We will be doing it in person here. We're offering it as part of our training session today. We'll see if we have some folks take us up on it. We are able, for those of you that are left on the horn, to be able to do these virtually or in person. So if your organization would like to host one, if you want to participate in an online one, if we can look at organizing that and invite you to that, we will look at doing that in the future as well. For anybody that's in the local area, there are going to be 2 showings of The Ripple Effect, which is a documentary about that chronicles the story of Kevin Hines, and his story is going to be told during that documentary here in Medford. So if you're not familiar, you can check out his website as well. Thank you, Sharon. I see the online. We'll look at potentially setting something up for that. Just a reminder to complete the sessions. If this is your first session, we have been doing evaluations all day. Those of you that have been part of other sessions, you may have done this already, but please make sure that you do fill out those evaluations. That's helpful for us. It's helpful for our funders to be able to support these ongoing trainings that we're offering through our health department in partnership with NTC, who is awesome, and we could not do it without them. So with that, if we have no other questions, comments, I want to thank everybody who was with us here all day. You guys are troopers. You do great work. We're glad to have you to be part of this.
Thank you, Melissa.
Yeah. I take no credit. I give all the credit to Leslie because she's the one that's the man behind the curtain. I won't make her get up here, but I want to. Just saying. But we appreciate everybody. We appreciate everybody. Thank you for being here.